let's check out some places that look like they're out of this world. Welcome to the vibrant, colorful world of Burano. It's an island in Italy. The first thing you'll notice is the striking and bold panorama formed by the rainbow of colored houses that adorn the island. Nowadays, Burano is mainly a tourist hotspot, with only a handful of locals calling it a home sweet home. The island is also home to the traditional style of lace making that's been around for centuries. Sure, you might find some cheap knockoffs in souvenir shops, but the real deal is handmade by a select few artisans in town. Anyway, you might be wondering why the Burano folks decided to paint their houses like in a Skittles commercial. The answer lies in the island's history. Let's rewind to the beginning. The first houses built on Burano were made of reeds and mud, and only later, thanks to the Romanization of the area, the houses started to be made of bricks. Yet, colors were not seen there until the birth of the famous lace industry, which brought an economic surge and fame to the island. The island was mainly inhabited by fishers. They experienced a lot of trouble during frequent winter mists. To solve this problem, they started painting the facades of their homes with identifying colors to find their way back home even in the thickest fog. Another theory suggests that different colors identified different families on the island, and some believe that the humidity and local women were behind the variation in colors, as they repainted the facades with paint they mixed from various sources. Let's head to another island. This one is in Japan, and, surprise, it's ruled by cats. Aoshima has over 200 furry feline friends, mostly orange and brown tabbies and calicos, and they're all waiting to say hello when you arrive. You can stroll around the island with them, sit back and relax as they play and sleep, or just enjoy the peaceful waters. The locals feed the cats every day, so they don't beg for food. However, it's always nice to give them some cat food in a designated area, or play with them using toys to make them even happier. Aoshima wasn't always a cat island. It used to be a thriving fishing village, where cats were brought to hunt mice. As fishing declined, the human population dwindled, but the cats remained and prospered. Some cat lovers discovered the island, and the rest is history. Thanks to the internet and word of mouth, Aoshima has become famous worldwide and is now a popular destination for cat lovers. Now, check out this crazy sinkhole on the Oregon coast near Cape Perpetua. It's called Thor's Well, and it looks like it's straight out of a movie. They also call it the drain pipe of the Pacific, which is kind of hilarious if you think about it. Basically, it's a hole in the rock that seems to swallow all the ocean water around it. Some scientists think it used to be a cave. This thing is a sight to see, especially during high tides or storms, when the waves go wild and crash into the hole. Just be careful, because you don't want to get swept down into the abyss. The next stop is Pamukkale in Turkey. It literally means cotton castle. This place is home to the most beautiful white water pools in the world, formed by thousands of years of flowing water and carbonate minerals. Pamukkale is steeped in ancient history and legends. People have been coming here for centuries to experience the healing properties of the hot springs. The story of a girl who turned into a stunning beauty after bathing in the pools is just one of the many tales that surround this enchanting place. The mineral-rich waters slowly drip down the mountainside, cascading down these mineral terraces into the pools below. The terraces are made of travertine, which is a fancy schmancy sedimentary rock that gets deposited by the mineral water from the hot springs. There are around 17 hot springs there, with water temperatures ranging from a toasty 95 degrees Fahrenheit to a boiling 212 degrees Fahrenheit. The water travels 1,050 feet to the head of the travertine terraces and deposits calcium carbonate on a section that's about 200 to 230 feet long. When the water gets super saturated with calcium carbonate, it spits out carbon dioxide and then deposits calcium carbonate on the surface. It starts out as a soft gel and eventually crystallizes into travertine. Cool, huh? In Myanmar, there's a surreal jungle village of crumbling temples called Nuang Ohak. Okay, so it's not the easiest place to get to, but trust me, it's worth it. After a serene boat ride that lasts about an hour, you'll walk through the charming little village. The floating market is where you can grab some fresh fish and veggies, and maybe even do a little haggling. Then, you'll see a couple of fancy new temples painted in bright white. They're super cool and all, but the real magic happens when you lay your eyes on the ancient crumbling temples that have been around for centuries. These structures have never been renovated. The intricate details of every temple and different Buddha statues are like a time machine, taking you back to the olden days. The whole vibe is just so awe-inspiring, it will leave a lasting impression on anyone lucky enough to visit. Have you heard of Colombia's Rainbow River? The name says it all. This place is a psychedelic burst of colors. The river flows, and it's like a liquid rainbow, with hues of red, yellow, purple, and more. The colors change depending on the light conditions, so you never know what you're going to get. The riverbed is covered with special plants, which make stuff pop with shades of red, and the waterfalls only add to the already epic view. Now check out this place called the Danakil Depression. This geological formation was caused by the continental drift of 3 tectonic plates. I mean, what are the odds? No wonder it's one of Earth's most unusual environments. You can find it in Ethiopia. Danakil Depression is known as one of the hottest places on the planet, and it's home to salt lakes, lava lakes, volcanoes, and colorful acidic springs. It's like a whole other world down there. So how did this funky place come about, you may ask? Well, as the African and Asian tectonic plates drifted apart, they left behind a huge hole in the ground. It's like Earth just opened up and said, "Hey, let's make something really cool down here." In addition to its wild geology, the Danakil is a hotspot for scientists studying the origin of life. There, they found the remains of Lucy, one of our early human ancestors dating back 3.2 million years. Plus, the acidic springs in the Dalal crater might hold the key to finding extremophile microbes. Those are organisms that thrive in extreme environments under high temperatures. Who knows what other mysteries this weird and wonderful place holds? So there's this beach near Fort Bragg, California, called Glass Beach. It's not because the sand is made of glass there, but because the beach used to be a dump site for garbage, including a ton of glass that was eventually pounded into tiny smooth pieces by the waves. You can't go around collecting that glass like some kind of treasure hunter, though. It's illegal. You'll have to leave it there for others to enjoy. The glass is slowly disappearing. It's getting ground down by the waves, and there are just too many tourists collecting it. So resist the temptation to grab a piece if you ever visit that place. Oh, and if you want to check out Glass Beach, there are actually 3 different sites where the garbage was dumped, but only one of them is adjacent to McCarrisher State Park. Do you recall any other funky places such as these? Go ahead and comment below.
Wow, looky here. It's New York City, the Big Apple, the city that never sleeps. Hong Kong on the Hudson, the greatest city in the world. New York, New York, the city so nice they named it twice. All right, I'll stop. You thought you knew this city so well, but underneath all that glitz and glamour is a facade, literally. New York is populated with some of the most iconic urban buildings in the world and home to some of the most unique and famous towers. Who would have known that New York was a front for fake buildings? And the cool thing is that there are plenty to search for. Okay, I'm adding that to my bucket list. So the question is, why do they put these fake buildings all over New York? The city is one of the most vibrant places in the world and requires many infrastructures to keep the city in motion. That means having many industrial structures and buildings in every major district. New York is charming for the design and the buildings. Imagine having industrial structures right next to your favorite pizza parlor or hot dog stand. The designers thought ahead and decided to disguise those industrial infrastructures as fake buildings. They blend with the city so well that they don't stand out. They look like your good old apartment or housing unit with a front door, real-life windows, and even charming balconies where people would hang out. The only thing is that there's nothing behind the facade and no one is allowed inside. So, where in the world can you find these fake buildings? For starters, one of the most popular fake buildings is in Brooklyn. At 58 Joralemon Street, you can find a very typical neighborhood. But between the buildings stands a brick building with a slightly deeper shade than the rest. It has bright open windows that blend in with the rest of the buildings in the neighborhood, except that they're blacked out. At first glance, you might not think of it as anything, but if you pay close attention, the building looks like a glitch from a video game. It was built in 1847, way before New York was considered glamorous. Originally, it was meant to be a regular building, but in 1908, they converted it into a fake building. Don't think you can just try to break in. Even if you could, it's pointless, because it's part of a ventilation fan for the subway. It also serves as an emergency exit for some of the surrounding buildings. Actually, throughout New York, many fake buildings exist to disguise the subway vents for the smoke to escape. All the way to 415 Bruckner Boulevard, the Bronx, this townhouse was designed by the Switzer Group, which is an interior architect company. It's not as charming as the one at 58 Joralemon Street, but it serves a similar purpose: to hide an electric substation for New York's utility company. The city needs these substations to reduce the high-voltage electricity to a lower voltage so it can be distributed locally. Having a building like this popping out of the middle of your neighborhood isn't exactly the smartest way to attract people to the Bronx. That's why the fake townhouse facade is the perfect camouflage. Now, some of these fake buildings don't really hit the mark and stick out like a sore thumb. The people of Manhattan describe the Mulberry Square infrastructure as a complete clunker. After plenty of redesigns and back to the drawing board meetings, the result is still not pretty. The locals compare it to a concrete box. They created windows without glass, which doesn't allow the building to blend in with the rest of the neighborhood. But it beats a typical subway ventilation plant either way. There are just so many places to visit and cross off your bucket list. But if you live in China, you can literally stay in the country and visit many iconic cities around the world. The replica cities began when the Chinese economy started booming in the early 90s. They wanted the lifestyle of the rich and famous without wanting to leave their country. They can be comfortable eating their local food and get the feeling of being abroad. The Chinese province of Guangdong has an identical copy of the historical Australian alpine village Hallstatt. The real Hallstatt is centuries old and one of the most charming places to discover. The local people of Hallstatt also had no idea that their home was being built in China. Some people thought that this was controversial, probably because it cost around $940 million to build it. Paris is undoubtedly one of the most charming cities you could ever visit. Its rich history and vibrant culture are enough to catch the first plane to go there. For residents of Tianducheng, that's something they can do anytime they want. The city is also known as Sky City and has a replica of the Eiffel Tower that looks eerily like the iconic one in Paris and built buildings to match the city's visual charm. One of the main things that will break the charm is the farmland surrounding the city. There's barely anyone there, and the streets are always empty, very un-Paris-like. Still, you can find some nice fountains and statues scattered along the streets to give it some spirit. There's laundry hung everywhere, even on the trees. The picturesque fountains are dry and many apartments are empty. Only a few stores are open for business. Even though this looks like a fake city, it's quite real. Some people live here because it's more affordable than other places. 2 hours away from this town is another version of Paris's Pont Alexandre III and a carbon copy of London's Tower Bridge, but with 4 towers instead of 2. Hey, such a bargain! You can also visit the closest thing to Italy, but this time you can go shopping. Florentia Village is an outlet mall that offers an array of shops to lose yourself. The good thing is that this was built by an Italian developer to capture the essence of an Italian village. It has fountains, canals, and mosaics for proper aesthetics. It began in 2011 and has more than 200 shops with many Italian brands and British, US, and Chinese brands as well. The place is so popular that it gets between 10,000 and 25,000 visitors per day. China also has other replica towns that put you in a mini Manhattan called the Yujiapu Financial District. The developer's goal was to make this place the financial center of the world. It was complete with the right landmarks, like the Rockefeller and Lincoln Centers, but the project was halted in 2019, leaving it mainly empty. You can find a typical English town with cobbled streets, Victorian homes, and restaurants that make Thames Town. This place was meant to recreate a European lifestyle fantasy without leaving Shanghai. China also has a Dutch town that has some elements of Amsterdam with windmills and famous canals. They even decided to copy some of the landmarks, like the Netherlands Maritime Museum. Here's a bonus story of Lebanon's thinnest building built out of a dispute. It's the story of two brothers who both inherited unequal plots of land. One of the brothers happened to get a very thin plot of land and couldn't help but be jealous of his brother's nice plot of land. He wasn't pleased. Both of the lands overlooked the Mediterranean Sea in a lively neighborhood of Beirut. So it's no wonder that both brothers couldn't agree on how they should develop their lands. It was obvious that the brother with the most land could build a proper building. The other brother had to improvise. He decided to obstruct his brother's property by constructing a thin building enough to only fit 14 feet at its widest and 2 feet at its most narrow. It was constructed in 1954, and the locals of the area know it as the Grudge. The crazy thing is that the place was once habitable with many visitors enjoying their stay. It's not easy to live there, but it's part of living the experience. The building is still standing, but is empty.
Hello, distinguished guests, and welcome to the Middle Ages. We're honored by thy presence. Sorry for the bumpy ride. It's not easy traveling in a cart. But the other two options you had were either riding a horse or simply walking. Oh well, that's medieval times for you. No highways around here. Anyway, I'm Constable Bright, and I'll be your guide through this castle tour. Now, forget everything you've learned about castles, especially those from princess movies, because I have prepared so many jaw-dropping castle secrets for you. Time to pass through the gate. After you. I want to begin our tour by correcting a misconception. Castles have often been confused with palaces or fortresses. However, unlike both of them, they were built with one specific purpose in mind. A castle is considered to be a fortified residence of an important person. On the other hand, palaces were not fortified, and fortresses didn't really serve residential purposes. European-style castles came into existence around the 9th and 10th centuries. During this time, you probably wouldn't want to live in Europe since it fell into chaos after the fall of the empires. The land was divided between lords, princes, or noble people of any kind. And now they have to find a way to control and protect their territories, so they began building castles. Much like the pillow fortresses you and your siblings built to protect your corners of the living room back when you were kids, but on a larger scale. However, aside from their original purpose of defending the land, castles also served as centers of administration and symbols of power. Precisely, urban castles were used to control the local population in addition to important travel routes. The earliest castles were actually made of wood. However, they eventually proved to be not so great for protecting the land. First of all, they usually relied on one central keep. Also, they would easily be burnt to the ground. That is one of the reasons why you can't visit a wooden castle museum today, as well as the fact that they're probably long rotten. Wooden castles were later replaced by stone ones as they were more sturdy. However, they had their disadvantages too. They were more expensive as well as time-consuming to construct. If you were swimming in gold and silver, then kudos to you. But again, you would still have to wait around 10 years for your castle to be completed, since the whole process included the stones being quarried and brought in. Remember, there were no diggers, cranes, or bulldozers to make things easier. As you can imagine, the first stone castles were cold, dark, smelly, and damp. To get rid of at least the smell, they would use sweet-smelling herbs to cover the walls and floors. Contrary to what representations of castles in popular culture may have led you to believe, earlier castles were not actually that big. Many of them consisted of just a single watchtower and had one room or two rooms if the owner was feeling fancy and had the money. When it came to building a castle, the location was strategically more important than the design. These structures would often be built on hard-to-reach places, such as islands, hill forts, or next to the sea so that they would have some natural protection as well. Such location choices also allowed the castle's residents to see for miles around them and spot and prepare for any dangers to come. So the more the castle was secluded and inaccessible, the better it was. But those without such natural defenses would be surrounded by ditches or moats for that extra layer of protection. In such cases, access to the castle would be granted via a drawbridge. However, in addition to being as secluded as possible, castles would have to be situated near features that were integral for survival, such as mills, fertile land, or a freshwater source. Now, let's talk about the gate and the stone outer walls for a while before we head inside. You might think that the central keep would be the most important part of a castle structure, but it's actually the gatehouse that needed to be protected at all costs, because it was also the weakest part that provided a straight path into the courtyard. That's why it would have to be as small as possible to stop any unwanted visitors. So, those massive gates you see in fantasy movies are actually unrealistic and impractical, since in reality, they would make the castle harder to defend. When it comes to the towers you see on every side of the castle walls, an upgrade to the design proved to be necessary over time. As it happened, the earlier castles had square towers. Yet, it was quite easy to destroy them. One simply would have to dig tunnels under the corners and they would collapse. That's why castle builders switched to round towers. It's time for us to take a step inside the keep now, which is the central building inside the castle. This was where the most important people lived, like the lords and ladies, as well as their guests, representatives, and sometimes even servants. The lord and lady would sleep in their chamber, that is, if they were one of the richer nobles to have more than one room in their castles. The others, on the other hand, would have to sleep in the Great Hall, which would also be used as the dining area. The funny thing is castles normally didn't have dungeons, at least not in a way you would think. The word dungeon is actually derived from the French word donjon, which means a keep. So, in reality, instead of being a prison, dungeons acted as the last places for the castle inhabitants to take shelter in case other outer defenses fell in the face of a threat. I bet your eyes caught the spiral stairs now, right? They were built that way for safety reasons. The clockwise direction of the staircase was meant to make it harder for an invader coming up the stairs to draw their swords, since it would be along the interior curve of the wall. This is all considering that their right hand was their sword hand, of course. On the other hand, anyone coming down the stairs would have an advantage because their sword hand would be on the outside of the wall, and they would have more room to swing. Ascending clockwise would also mean that the invader would be exposing more of their body in order to get their sword, hence making it easier for the defender to ward off their swings. In addition to that, stairs would be designed with uneven steps, some would be taller and others would be shorter. This would allow people who were familiar with the castle to move quickly and cause invaders to stumble and fall. In case emergency situations escalated, castles had secret entrances and exits as well. The main concealed door would be called the postern, or the sally port, and would traditionally lie at the base of the castle's wall. It would often be small and easy to defend, as well as secured with metal grates. It held great importance when it came to allowing people to escape or bring in food and other supplies during sieges. You might need to use the bathroom before our tour ends, but sorry to inform you that there are no toilets around here. The most toilet-like thing you would get in a castle would be a room with a hole that led out to the moat surrounding the walls. These rooms would be called garderobes, and as you can imagine, they would smell terrible. That is why people would also use them as wardrobes with the idea that the odor would keep insects away and prevent them from damaging their clothes. So I suggest you wait until you're back at your modern home to take care of your business. Fare thee well, traveler.
Okay now, gather around my digital campfire and listen to the thrilling story of one man's determination to survive, despite all odds. Ready? Okay, let me take you back to 1941. It all started when George Hopkins, a professional parachutist, was dared by a friend to parachute and land on an isolated steep hill. In this case, it would be fair to call him a true daredevil, since this hill was also called Devil's Tower. Devil's Tower is a butte composed of magmatic rock. It's located in Crook County, Wyoming. It's also known as Bear Lodge Butte because plenty of bears used to live there. Also, it was considered a sacred place by indigenous people. They have fascinating legends on how the rock was formed. But Hopkins' story is not a legend. No, it's all real. Before his almost week-long survival adventure began, Hopkins already had several records when it came to parachuting. One of them was for making the most parachute jumps. The number was close to 2,500. Another record was for jumping from the greatest height, which was 26,400 feet. He even made a living by leaping from burning planes for movies. That's a real Hollywood hero.
Yeah.
However, he was not the one to be content with what he had. He always wanted to push his limits further and achieve more. That's when he struck a wager with his friend Earl Brocklesby, who was also a bit of an eccentric person himself. The man was known for things like keeping a live rattlesnake under his hat, which he would reveal from time to time, letting people pet it. Brocklesby offered to give $50 to Hopkins if he could successfully parachute and land on top of the rock. That amount might not seem like much, but it equals around $800 today. So now you know why parents tell you to choose your friends carefully. Of course, Hopkins wanted to win the bet. With the tower summit being just over 1 acre in size, he wanted to prove that he could land precisely on the target. And he was confident that he'd be able to do it easily. What could go wrong? This kind of self-confidence we all want, am I right? Well, in this case, maybe not so much. Hopkins made the mistake of not getting permission from the National Park Service for his publicity stunt. He only informed one newspaper reporter from the Sundance Times, promising them exclusive coverage of his jump on condition that they didn't tell anyone until after the act was complete. His plan was simple. He was going to jump out of a plane and land on the rock. After that, a bag with climbing supplies would be dropped down to him. There would be a sledgehammer, an old car axle sharpened on one end, and 1,000 feet of rope inside. He was later going to use all this to come down from the tower. Little did 29-year-old Hopkins know as he took off in a plane on October 1, 1941, that his plan was going to fail. As soon as he made the jump, the problems began. He was nearly knocked off course by severe wind gusts. The landing was rough. The man was reportedly dragged several feet across the rocks, hitting a boulder. Thankfully, he was mostly unharmed. However, that wasn't the case with his rope and supplies. His pilot dropped his stuff down, but the bag bounced and fell off the edge of the tower, leaving Hopkins stranded on top over 1,200 feet in the air. The ironic thing is that he was ultimately going to realize that even if he had managed to retrieve his supplies, he still wouldn't be able to make it to the bottom. His rope was around 200 feet shorter than needed. Oops. Realizing this was now an emergency situation, his pilot informed the authorities and a plan to save Hopkins was put into motion. The first thing they did was to try to drop the supplies for the second time. However, that didn't work because they didn't bundle the rope properly. As a result, it unfurled while falling and got tangled and frozen due to heavy wind and snow. Hopkins was unable to untangle the frozen rope despite all his efforts. It finally sank in that he was going to have to spend the night there, shivering in the rain. After hearing about what had happened, spectators, photographers, and newspaper reporters flocked to the scene to watch things unravel before their eyes. The Park Service later reported that over 7,000 people visited the rock during the course of these events. What is a publicity stunt without the public anyway? The next day, Hopkins started getting frustrated with each passing hour. That's why he decided to throw a note off the edge of the rock. In this note, he said he would like to attempt to parachute off the tower. But the authorities immediately vetoed this idea, stating it was too risky. But now, they had to come up with a better way to save him. As they were brainstorming about the safest way to do it, airplanes kept dropping water, blankets, warm clothing, and food to Hopkins. He shared it with chipmunks and squirrels. It's reported that even a medium-rare steak was in one of those survival bags. Still wouldn't consider it a 5-star dining experience, though. The ideas of saving him with the help of a helicopter or even a Goodyear blimp was quickly dismissed. They were too dangerous due to increasingly hazardous weather conditions. Eventually, it was decided that it would be best for someone to personally retrieve Hopkins. In the next several days, several attempts to rescue Hopkins were made by experienced climbers, but they all ended in failure due to merciless winds and snow. That's when Hopkins' luck must have returned, because a Dartmouth student named Jack Durrance notified the Park Services that he was willing to come and rescue Hopkins with a bunch of his climbing buddies. The authorities were willing to accept Durrance's offer and give him a chance. After all, he was one of the first people to ever climb the tower back in 1938. Durrance and his team were supposed to travel by plane, but the flight was delayed due to bad weather. This forced them to travel by train to Denver, and then by car the rest of the way. They arrived at the tower on October 5th and started working on finding a safe route for the rescue mission. It was stated that the tower was nothing but a sheet of glass when they arrived. Fortunately, that didn't stop them from slowly ascending to the summit where Hopkins was waiting. They did that by hammering pegs into the rock and attaching their ropes to it to keep them safer as they clambered up the steep rock. The climb took them 9 hours. They found Hopkins in good physical condition and good mood. Together, they began their descent, which was completed with little difficulty. In the end, Hopkins appeared in newspaper headlines just like he wanted and got his $50 from his friend. Afterward, Hopkins continued parachuting. He even helped train young parachuters. He eventually quit flying and jumping in 1958, but he still holds the title of the only man to parachute onto the top of Devil's Tower. Now, buttes are not the only places where parachuters get stranded, by the way. There are many cases of them getting stuck on trees, hills, radio towers, lampposts, and even buildings. One such case happened fairly recently during the turkey leg of the 2014 Pro Base World Cup. A top base jumper taking part in the Cup was going to jump from the 780-foot-tall Sapphire Tower, which is one of Istanbul's tallest skyscrapers. If only he knew things were going to get nasty. Seconds after he started his jump, his parachute snared itself on the side of the building, and the man was left there, hanging high and dry. Where is Spider-Man when you need him, right? After dangling in midair for almost an hour, he was eventually rescued by firefighters who used a wire rope-suspended cage platform used for glass cleaning to save him. Well, I'll bet he'll think twice before singing "I Believe I Can Fly Now." Or not.
Saturn's iconic rings will disappear in less than 2 years. Soon, we won't be able to see Jupiter's Great Red Spot. Pluto's atmosphere might vanish any day now. Even the universe itself could be slowly evaporating right at this moment. But let me start from the very beginning. Saturn's rings won't vanish forever, at least in the near future, but they will seemingly disappear from view. This phenomenon is caused by the planet's tilt as it orbits the Sun. As a result, the eye-catching rings adorning the gas giant will get invisible to stargazers in 2025. This outrageous disappearance occurs because Saturn's thin rings turn edge-on. It's like holding a sheet of paper horizontally at eye level parallel to the ground so that only the edge of the paper can be seen. Something similar happens to the gas giant's rings. As the seasons on the planet progress, instead of the southern side of the rings tilted our way, we start seeing the northern side. But then the planet tilts again, revealing the southern side once again. Such a ring plane crossing happens every 15 years when our planet passes through the gas giant's ring plane. The last time this phenomenon occurred was in 2009. Afterward, the rings gradually became visible again over the course of several months. This time, the rings will be on edge in March 2025. Then they will slowly come back into view and disappear again in November of the same year. Soon after that, the rings will reappear, first becoming visible to the largest telescopes, later for everyone else to see. At the same time, further into the future, the rings might cease to exist for good. Astronomers have concluded that Saturn's rings, which mostly consist of ice and rocky dust from smashed asteroids, are younger than we thought. They're losing tons and tons of mass per second all the time, and it's likely to be a few 100 million years at most before they vanish completely. Let's move to the Great Red Spot on Jupiter. This immense raging storm might stop spinning in the next 20 years. The storm in question is larger than our planet. It was first spotted in 1830, but observations from the 1600s mentioned the presence of a giant spot on Jupiter too. If it was the same Great Red Spot, then we can say that the storm has been raging for centuries. The storm's vortex has remained so powerful thanks to Jupiter's 300 to 400 mile-per-hour jet streams. But like any other storm, the Great Red can't keep raging forever. It's been shrinking for a long time. In a decade or two, it's predicted to turn into GRC, the Great Red Circle, and who knows, maybe it will later turn into the GRM, the Great Red Memory. In the late 1800s, the storm was more than 35,000 miles across, 4 times the diameter of Earth. But when Voyager 2 flew past Jupiter in 1979, the storm had already shrunk almost twice its original size. And this shrinking is still happening. In 2017, the GRS spanned the width of a bit more than 10,150 miles, less than 1.3 times the diameter of Earth. Moving on, Pluto's atmosphere is going through a weird transformation. This icy dwarf planet sitting over 3 billion miles away from Earth in the region of the Kuiper Belt drew astronomers' attention in 2018 when it passed in front of a star. With such a powerful source of light illuminating Pluto, researchers managed to examine the dwarf planet and its atmosphere. They came to a shocking conclusion that Pluto's atmosphere is refreezing back onto its surface as the dwarf planet gets colder and colder. Astronomers used several telescopes in different spots in the USA and Mexico to observe Pluto and its thin atmosphere, which is mainly made of nitrogen. This atmosphere is supported by the vapor pressure of ice on the surface of the dwarf planet. For around 25 years, Pluto has been moving further away from the Sun, and its surface temperature has been gradually going down. Pluto is really far from our star at the moment, but at one point it will start getting closer in other regions of its incredibly huge orbit. Besides Jupiter's Great Red Spot, Saturn's rings, and Pluto's atmosphere, we're also losing stars. But stars don't vanish, right? For thousands of years, scientists believed that lights in the sky were fixed and unchanging. Even after they realized those lights were physical objects, just like the sun, they were still sure that stars went through major changes extremely slowly, on timescales of millions and billions of years. In reality, though, the most massive stars, which can be hundreds of times heavier than the sun, can go through sudden catastrophic events. For example, once they reach the ends of their lives, they pass away in blinding explosions of supernovae, shining for months on end and visible across hundreds of millions of light years. But there are stars that seem to just wink out of visibility. It should be impossible. And over the past years, a group of researchers tried to figure out whether there's actually a chance of such a phenomenon happening. They started to compare data collected over decades of observations. The project is called VASCO, the Vanishing and Appearing Sources During a Century of Observations. The scientists are interested in all kinds of disappearing objects, but they're hoping to find a star that was steady and present for a long time, and then just vanished without a trace. Even if you point a super powerful telescope there, you'll still see nothing. Our current understanding of space and its laws suggest that stars change very slowly over long periods of time. Dramatic disappearances are supposed to leave noticeable traces behind. Of course, it doesn't mean that all stars should shine steadily. The sky is filled with stars that change in brightness and pulsate. But Vasco is about something very different. They want to find something that goes from a completely steady star to vanishing entirely. Such a phenomenon hasn't been documented yet, and such a discovery might lead to new physics. And now, let's move on to the most disturbing part, the one about the evaporating universe. According to a famous theory proposed by Stephen Hawking, black holes, the densest objects in the universe, evaporate over time. They lose mass in the form of bizarre radiation. But a new study claims that Hawking radiation, or something very similar to it, might not be limited to black holes. It's likely to be everywhere, and it could mean that the universe is slowly but surely evaporating right in front of our eyes. Now, Hawking radiation is something no one has ever observed, but theories and experiments suggest that it can actually exist. Let's see how it works. There's a misconception that black holes are cosmic hoovers, slurping up everything that comes too close with the help of their immense gravitational pull. In reality, though, black holes don't have more gravity than any other body of a similar mass. What they're famous for is their density, incredible amounts of mass packed into a tiny, tiny space. Within a certain proximity to such a dense object, gravitational pull becomes so powerful that it becomes impossible to escape. Not even the speed of light in a vacuum is enough, and that's the fastest known thing in the universe. At the same time, anything massive or dense enough can produce a serious curvature of space-time. In simple words, the immense gravitational field of these objects makes space-time wrap around them. Even though black holes are the most extreme example, space-time also curves around other super-dense objects, like white dwarfs, and neutron stars or galaxy clusters. It means that any super-dense and supermassive object can have some sort of radiation similar to Hawking radiation. And after a very, very long period of time, it could lead to everything in the universe evaporating, following the fate of old supermassive black holes. If it turns out to be true, it will change our understanding not only of Hawking radiation, but also our view of the universe and its and our future.
Forget this. You're more likely to encounter a unicorn in a coffee shop than survive at the bottom of the ocean without air for more than half an hour. But some people are that lucky and unlucky at the same time. Take Chris Lemons, for example. Chris Lemons is a commercial saturation diver whose life changed in September 2012. It was a normal working day for him and his colleagues Duncan and David. They were sitting in a special chamber on the ship above the diving site. Then they entered a diving bell, crammed like sardines in a can. This is like another chamber dangling from the ship, which they use to get to the diving site. This chamber is like the claw machine you catch toys with, but instead of a claw, it has a small chamber at the end. They arrived at the diving site, and Chris and Dave prepared to dive. Duncan was staying in the bell to monitor the gear and, the most crucial part, the umbilical cord. This cord supplies divers with oxygen, heat, and power to keep their lights shining because at such a depth, it's super dark. So it's important for someone to monitor the situation since divers' lives depend on it. To better understand the process, you must know more about commercial saturation diving. Being in the office the whole day is much safer than being a commercial saturation diver, unless your office is in a lion's cage. Saturation diving is so rare and dangerous that you've probably just heard about it now. You must dive deep in the cold ocean to work on oil pipes and such. Diving in general can be risky because of something called decompression sickness. If you dive too deep and rise to the surface too quickly, tiny bubbles of nitrogen can form inside your body, which can cause serious health issues or worse. That is not a problem for regular divers because they don't dive nearly as deep as saturation divers. Saturation divers go from 600 feet to 1,000 feet underwater. That's almost the height of the Empire State Building. Rising to the surface from that crazy depth can take as long as 2 weeks. It takes less time to go to the moon and back. It's almost impossible to stay in the water for 2 weeks, so divers have a unique trick that keeps them alive. A chamber cleverly designed to have the same pressure as the bottom of the ocean. They spend months in this chamber. The chamber is isolated. It's like being in jail, but much worse. You can't get out no matter what. The world could be on fire, but you'd have to stay inside or pass away. The good news is that divers have the internet there. The chamber is filled with a mixture of helium and oxygen, so if you want to call your family, you will sound funny. Most divers don't call anybody.
Because it's fun to inhale helium and talk in a funny voice for a short time.
But doing it for weeks isn't very pleasant. Now you know more about this type of job and how dangerous it is. Thanks to all those clever tricks, divers can do their job without facing significant risks. But sometimes, bad things are inevitable. So let's return to our story. Chris and Dave had to replace a pipe section and do regular checkups at the bottom of the North Sea. For them, it was like teaching a cat to nap, whatever that is. But the weather above them was not so good. There was a strong wind and waves that reached 13 feet. On the other hand, weather like that was typical for the North Sea, so there was nothing unusual to worry about. The ship carrying out the mission had a crazy feature similar to autopilot. No matter how many waves there were, it would keep the vessel stable. The dive was going smoothly until the alarm started beeping out of nowhere. Dave and Chris immediately climbed in. David made it to the bell safely, but Chris's cord caught the edge of the manifold, and no matter what he did, he couldn't get out. He thought this should not have happened because there was plenty of slackline. He could hear the cord tightening, then realized that the ship had started moving. He had basically become an anchor, and as we all know, humans are not designed to be anchors. The cord snapped, and he fell to the bottom of the sea. This was the worst situation that could happen to him. He lost everything: oxygen, communication, and heat, meaning he would either freeze or suffocate. He had around 5 minutes of emergency O2, but that was not nearly enough to survive. Chris had to climb up to the manifold to be rescued, but when the cord snapped, his light went out, so he had to walk in the pitch-black sea and navigate by feeling around. Chris couldn't even see his hands, but he did the impossible and climbed to the manifold. The problems didn't end there, unfortunately. He was in the worst possible situation, and no one could tell him what to do or what had happened. Every breath was more valuable than a bucket of gold, so he had to breathe super slowly. Chris had only 2 minutes of oxygen left by the time he climbed up, and after some time, when he didn't see any signs of the rescue team, he lost all hope. The ship that was supposed to save him was in chaos. They couldn't stay stable to find him. All odds were against Chris at that moment. The only thing in his favor was that the ship had a small submarine that could be controlled remotely, and the crew could see what had happened to him. They got to the diving spot, and it was like watching a horror movie. You can't look away, and you can't unsee it. They all expected to see the diver in the worst possible shape. By some miracle, he was still moving, but not for long. Hundreds of people were glued to the screen, watching their colleagues suffer. They weren't that far from the site, but they couldn't do anything to save their friend. After the ship had stabilized, they went where Chris was. By that time, they had lost all hope and were going down to recover the body. David was tasked with getting Chris. He was feeling on edge, but prepared mentally for the challenge ahead. Around a half hour later, David finally arrived at the destination. He immediately grabbed Chris and climbed into the bell. Duncan was waiting for them inside. When they arrived, Duncan immediately took off Chris's diving mask. What they saw was horrifying. Chris's face was not the usual color, and he was cold. He looked like he had passed away. Duncan had tried giving him first aid, and suddenly, Chris jumped up, lively as can be, and sat down in his seat. David and Duncan were shocked. Chris seemed to be completely fine. He was examined by lots of doctors and was announced to be as healthy as someone who had spent a half an hour without air could be. By all odds, he shouldn't have survived more than 3 minutes without air. No scientist to this day knows how he survived. It could have been because he had been exposed to a high level of O2 in the chamber, and he also had a higher than normal O2 level in his lungs. The cold temperature could have slowed down his metabolism and prevented him from losing too much energy, but nobody knows for sure. Now, you would think that after this, he would never dive again, but he continues to work as a saturation diver to this day and has no intention of quitting. He even got back to the same spot that nearly destroyed him and finished the job that he had started. Wow.
Picture this. You're floating about in the depths of space, gazing down on our blue marble of a planet. What's on top? You might think it's the North Pole. But that isn't necessarily so. The truth is, our collective belief that the North is at the top of the world doesn't have any solid scientific backing. It's just one of those things we've accepted over time. And this acceptance has a compelling history, with a dash of astrophysics, a bit of psychology, and a surprising twist. It influences how we feel about our world more than we might think. Figuring out where you are is crucial for survival, and that's true for most species, not just us humans. Similar to honeybees, for example, humans have a knack for creating mental maps of our surroundings. But where we really stand out is in our efforts to share these maps with others. We've been at it for a while now, drawing maps on anything from cave walls to computer screens. The earliest ones we've found date back to 14,000 years ago. Despite this long history, it's only in the last few centuries that we've decided that the North should consistently be at the top of the map. History buffs tell us that for a long time, the North was hardly ever at the top because it symbolized darkness. The West didn't make the cut either, given that's where the sun bows out each evening. However, early Asian maps seem to defy this trend. Now, before you say it, their compasses weren't the reason they put North at the top. Early Asian compasses were actually aligned to point south, seen as a more favorable direction than the cold, dark north. But in these maps, the emperor, who resided up north, was always placed at the top, with his loyal subjects gazing upwards towards him. Looking back, every culture had its own idea of what was worth looking up to, leading to varied orientations of early maps. The Egyptians preferred the east, where the sun graces us each morning. Early Arabic maps favored the south. European maps from the same era put the east at the top. So, when did everyone decide that north was the new top? You might be tempted to credit it to explorers like Columbus and Magellan who navigated by the North Star. But they didn't really see the world in that light. Columbus, for instance, saw the world with the east at the top, believing he was headed toward paradise. Mercator's 1569 world map was a game changer, considering it was the first to factor in the Earth's switch to more accurate navigation. But even then, the emphasis wasn't on the north. Mercator projected the poles to infinity, considering them relatively unimportant as sailors didn't venture there often. It's possible that the choice to place north on top was simply because the Europeans, who were doing their fair share of exploring, were located in the northern hemisphere with a whole lot more land to cover and people to meet. For whatever reason, this north up idea has stuck. Even when a NASA astronaut in 1972 snapped a photo of the Earth with the south at the top, it was flipped over to avoid confusion. Here's where it gets interesting. When you gaze at Earth from space, the concept of up and down loses all sense. Sure, Earth aligns with the plane of other planets in our solar system because we all share a cosmic birth story, but we could just as well flip the image or put the sun on top or bottom depending on your cosmic viewpoint. Even within the Milky Way, our solar system is tilted by about 63 degrees. If you think about it, the concepts of up, down, left, or right don't really apply in space. But how about a change of pace? Should we be open to viewing our world from a different perspective? There's some psychological evidence that our north-up mentality might be skewing our perceptions of value. Most folks consider the north to be up and the south down. It even made psychologists wonder if these associations might influence how people value different places on a map. When shown a map of a made-up city, people were more likely to choose a residence in the northern part. And when asked where hypothetical people of different social status would live, they allocated the rich to the north and the less fortunate to the south. It's not too big of a leap to speculate that humans might be less bothered about what happens to regions lower than where they are on the map. But there's a simple solution: flip the map upside down. These experiments showed that this simple action wiped out the north equals good bias. On that note, south up maps are already available online. Australians would enjoy this change, that's for sure. Whatever it is that you'd prefer at the top of your map, you would need a compass to guide you. Have you ever paused to think of its system? It is one of the oldest gadgets we've got in our survival toolkit. It's been around for centuries, serving as a beacon for adventurers, travelers, and explorers, guiding them through uncharted oceans and helping them discover new continents. Basically, compasses turned humans from stay-at-home types into globe-trotting nomads. Our beautiful blue planet isn't just a spinning ball in the cosmos. It also has its own magnetic field. Imagine it as a colossal magnet, humming with invisible energy. This is all thanks to Earth's core, a ball of molten iron under terrific pressure right at the center of our planet. This core, part liquid, part solid crystal, churns and swirls due to Earth's spin, creating the magnetic field that gives us our north and south poles. But here's where it gets a bit complicated. These magnetic poles don't perfectly line up with the Earth's geographic poles, the ones that the Earth spins around. They're close, sure, but not exactly in the same place. This is why the compass, which reacts to magnetic fields, doesn't point directly to what we call true north, which is the geographic North Pole. Instead, it points to the magnetic north, located a bit off from the true one. But don't worry, it's close enough to get us where we need to go. Let's talk more about this true north versus magnetic north business. Remember the piece of news from September 2019, when for the first time in over 360 years, compasses at Greenwich pointed to the true north? Well, that's quite a rare occurrence. Usually compasses point towards magnetic north, which isn't a constant spot on the map. It changes and drifts over time, following shifts in the Earth's core. On the other hand, true north refers to the geographic North Pole, a specific unchanging point on Earth's surface. So when you're holding a compass, it's really the magnetic north it's directing you toward, not the true north. Here's where things get even more fun. The angle between the direction of the true north and the magnetic north, as shown by the compass, is called declination. It's a fancy word for a simple concept. Now, because Earth's magnetic field isn't a simple, straightforward thing, it has its wobbles and dips. The declination isn't the same everywhere. It varies from place to place. Also, here's what it's made of. It has this tiny needle that's made from a metal that's been magnetized. Iron's a common one. They set this needle on a little pointy thing, or pivot, and let it float in some kind of liquid. Often, it's mineral oil or something similar. This lets the needle spin around and dance with the Earth's magnetic field. When you hold your compass flat in your hand, the needle settles down and points to magnetic north. Now, look at your compass and you'll notice these small markings. They're known as degrees, and here's the fun bit. The needle's red end always points north, and the white or black end always points south. That's your compass's north-south dance. Plus, there's often an arrow on the compass case, right at the top. That's your orientation arrow. It was the beginning of the 20th century, and two rivals, Robert Scott and Roald Amundsen, set on their expeditions to become the first people in history to reach the South Pole. The race wasn't easy, and it ended tragically for Scott. Amundsen has won and set his tent on the pole before his rivals. A member of Scott's expedition known as Terra Nova, British geologist Thomas Griffith Taylor, not only survived the harsh conditions, but also made an unexpected discovery. He found a waterfall of what appeared to be blood at the rocky base of the glacier, which now has his name, in 1911. It took scientists more than a century to figure out what is behind the eerie coloring. A team of American scientists journeyed to Taylor Glacier with powerful electron microscopes to analyze its contents. Previous studies had scratched the surface of the Crimson Enigma, but no one had previously done a full-scale analysis of its mineralogical makeup. These researchers unleashed a whole arsenal of analytical equipment and spotted little iron-rich nanospheres. These teeny tiny particles, 1/100th the size of human red blood cells, originate from ancient microbes. They flourish abundantly in the meltwaters of Taylor Glacier. These nanospheres are jam-packed with iron, silicon, calcium, aluminum, and sodium, forming a unique composition that paints the subglacial water a vivid shade of red. These nanospheres don't have the usual crystalline structure found in minerals, which is why previous detection methods failed to spot them. Taylor Glacier's icy depths harbor an ancient microbial community that has thrived in isolation for thousands or possibly even millions of years. This discovery could help us in the search for life outside of Earth. Dr. Ken Levy, a research scientist at Johns Hopkins University, has some impressive expertise in planetary materials and the analysis of Martian samples. He decided to find out what would happen if a Mars rover landed in Antarctica. Could it figure out what makes bloodfalls so mesmerizingly red? So, researchers treated bloodfalls as a simulated Martian landing site. They used techniques inspired by the rovers exploring the red planet. The samples they collected were sent to Johns Hopkins processing facilities. There, Livy unleashed the power of transmission electron microscopy and revealed the enigmatic nanospheres. He made the conclusion that our current methods of analyzing other planets' surfaces with rovers fall short. They can't unravel the true nature of environmental materials, especially on chilly planets like Mars. These materials might be super tiny and non-crystalline, throwing off our detection methods. To truly grasp the essence of rocky planets, we'll need transmission electron microscopes. Strapping one onto a Mars rover isn't feasible yet, but it could mean a start of a new era in space exploration. Have you ever seen a waterfall on fire? Every February, when the stars align just right, Horsetail Fall in Yosemite National Park gets a sensational makeover. As the sun sets, its rays hit the waterfall at the perfect angle, transforming it into a blazing display of vibrant orange and red hues. We don't know exactly who and when discovered this natural miracle. The original valley dwellers may have known about it, but they kept it to themselves. It wasn't until 1973 that photographer Galen Rowell captured the first known photo of the waterfall, bringing it into the limelight. Since then, the firefall has become a global sensation, spreading like wildfire on social media and drawing crowds from far and wide. This magnificent cascade draws hundreds of spectators every year, but they can only see the show under certain conditions. First things first, Horsetail Fall needs a flowing stream. If there's not enough snowpack in February, the waterfall won't have enough water to create the magic. The temperatures must be warm enough to melt the snowpack during the day. If it's too chilly, the snow will stay frozen, and the fiery spectacle won't ignite. Second, we need a clear western sky at sunset. Those sunbeams need a straight path to hit Horsetail Fall and make it come alive. And since the weather in Yosemite is ever-changing, clouds can magically clear up just in time for the show. If all the conditions are just right, you'll witness the Yosemite Firefall in all its glory for about 10 minutes. The mystery of the sailing stones in California's Death Valley National Park has puzzled scientists for years. Heavy stones seem to have a mind of their own and move across Racetrack Playa, a dried-up lakebed. They leave behind a trail on the cracked mud. There were all kinds of theories to explain this phenomenon, from magnetic fields or dust devils, which are strong whirlwinds, to mischievous pranksters. No one has actually witnessed these rocks in action, which only added to the mystery. In 2006, a NASA scientist named Ralph Lorenz entered the scene. He was studying weather conditions on other planets, but he couldn't resist the allure of Death Valley and those elusive sailing stones. He had an eureka moment while tinkering at his kitchen table with a Tupperware container. Lorenz filled the container with water, leaving a small rock poking out, and chucked it in the freezer. Then he placed this icy construction in a big tray of water with sand at the bottom and gently blew on it. The rock began to glide across the water, leaving a trail in the sand. Lorenz had been studying how ice can make big rocks float and move along tidal beaches in the Arctic Sea. Applying this knowledge, he and his research team figured out that, under certain winter conditions in Death Valley, enough water and ice could form to make the rocks float across Racetrack Playa in a light breeze. and as they glided, they left their mark in the muddy terrain. The River of Five Colors, Cano Cristales in Colombia, has the unofficial title of the most beautiful river in the world. For most of the year, it looks like any other regular river. The real magic happens between the wet and dry seasons when the water level is just perfect. This unique river floor is lined with a special plant, and when the conditions are right, it bursts into a dazzling display of colors. Think vibrant reds, stunning yellows, and lush greens, all mingling with the blue water. It's like stepping into a living rainbow with 1,000 shades in between. This phenomenal display only lasts for a few weeks, from September through November. During Colombia's wet season, the river flows too fast and deep, covering up the river floor and denying the plant the sunlight it needs to turn red. And in the dry season, there's simply not enough water to support the vibrant life in the river. So you have to catch it at just the right time. The reason behind Maldivian beaches glowing in the dark at night isn't a mystery, but it doesn't make them any less impressive. It happens thanks to the bioluminescent plankton. These tiny creatures are like little underwater disco balls, emitting a cool blue glow when they are agitated or on the move. Imagine walking along the shoreline and leaving behind glowing footprints. You can even take a night swim amongst these magical plankton. Researchers have discovered that their bioluminescence is actually a clever defense mechanism against predators. When these microorganisms flash their little blue lights, it disorients and surprises their attackers. The plankton produces this light using a chemical called luciferin. These enchanting plankton can appear at any time of the year. The best chances of seeing them in all their glowing glory are from June to December. During this period, there's a higher volume of plankton in the seas of the Maldives, creating the perfect conditions for a luminous show after the sun sets and the night sky takes over. You'll only witness the magic of bioluminescent plankton when tidal currents bring them close to the shore in large numbers. It's hard to predict exactly when this spectacular show will happen, so make sure to do your research and prepare to take photos with a high ISO to capture it, exactly like it looks in travel catalogs. A story that will surely send chills down your spine is about a daring young American sailor named Tammy Oldham Ashcraft. Back in 1983, when she was just 23 years old, she had quite the adventure. Along with her British beau Richard Sharp, she was tasked with navigating the ocean from Tahiti to San Diego in California on a luxury yacht. But you know how the ocean can be? It's not always smooth sailing. 20 days into the journey, the two lovebirds got ensnared in a Category 4 hurricane, coming with monstrous waves and wicked winds. Even though they stood their ground against the raging waves, the yacht was rolled over like a beach ball as it tumbled between two waves. The last thing etched in Tammy's memory, before being knocked out cold for 27 hours, is Richard shouting as an enormous wave slammed onto their boat. Later on, she penned down her harrowing ordeal in a book, which was later turned into a movie. Tammy had her fair share of sailing experience under her belt before the fateful journey. She had great navigation skills and had already sailed across the Pacific twice. Setting off from Tahiti to San Diego, they initially had a decent journey, but a couple of weeks in, trouble started brewing. They caught wind of a tropical area down by Panama, and before they knew it, the storm was charging west and gathering intensity. The pair made efforts to reach the safety zone, but the hurricane was moving at incredible speed. As fate would have it, the usually short-lived hurricane kept going. Facing giant waves and hurricane winds is enough to give anyone nightmares. The boat took a hammering, and despite their best preparations, dealing with such rough seas was a monumental task. The boat would leap into the air over the towering waves and come crashing down, making the whole structure shudder. Richard was in the cockpit, secured with a safety harness as they bobbed over the massive waves. But then, they ran into rogue waves, those monstrous anomalies that come out of nowhere. One such wave made the boat do a 360-degree flip, and that was the last thing Tammy remembered. When she came to her senses, Richard was nowhere to be found. The safety harnesses meant to keep him attached to the boat were ruptured. With no one nearby to pick up her distress signals, Tammy was left with a non-functioning long-distance radio after 2 weeks of relentless battering from the sea. All she had was a short-range, very high-frequency VHF radio, which gave up after 5 days due to water damage. She was alone and completely cut off. Tammy had to rely on her basic tools to navigate to Hawaii, a sextant and sight reduction tables. Using the sun's position, she determined her latitude, and once she found her watch, she could also figure out her longitude. It took a while, but she did make it to Hawaii. Throughout her time being lost at sea, Tammy showed just how resourceful she was. She remembered trying to get the engine running, but some of the boat's parts had melted onto the propeller shaft. Despite being mechanically inclined, she couldn't waste time trying to fix something that was potentially beyond repair. Instead, she relied on her training as a bosun. Tammy also kept a log of her time at sea, always aware that if she didn't make it, this might be the only clue to what happened. Looking back on the log, she admitted that her mental state had been fragile during her ordeal. Despite everything, Tammy shared that the human survival instinct is incredibly strong. She wanted to live. The hero of our next tale is a man named Steve Callahan. His story, though it sounds like a Hollywood movie script, is real as real can be. Back in 1982, Steve found himself participating in a single-handed sailing race across the vast Atlantic Ocean. He trusted his voyage to a self-designed vehicle, proudly named Napoleon Solo. It was a sturdy, reliable boat, built to weather storms and defy waves. But unpredictable weather loomed in, tearing into the race fleet and sinking a bunch of boats. Steve had to sideline himself and dock his beloved Napoleon Solo in Spain for some urgent repairs. After patching up the boat, Steve took off again, this time setting his sights on the Canary Islands. His heart was set on crossing the Atlantic and reaching the sandy shores of Antigua. Sadly, his boat was battered by strong winds, leaving it significantly damaged. Steve found himself with no choice but to abandon the ship. He soon boarded an inflatable life raft. Steve decided he wasn't going down without a fight. Before Napoleon Solo sank into the depths of the Atlantic, he dived repeatedly into the turbulent waters to salvage what he could. With a few essential items secured, he battled hunger, thirst, and loneliness for the next 76. Some fishermen eventually found him and whisked him off to a local hospital where he began his recovery. Now you might think this is where Steve's story ends. His incredible saga of survival was shared far and wide in sailing magazines, featured on numerous TV shows, and finally cemented in his own book. But the record for the longest time ever spent lost at sea was broken by a man named Jose Salvador Alvarenga. He is an incredibly tough soul whose tenacity and will to survive would become the stuff of legends. That's because for 438 long, difficult days, he was adrift. A fisherman by trade, Jose was no stranger to the sea's unpredictable moods. His life's most terrifying adventure started on a day just like any other, in 2012. That was the day Jose and his fishing mate headed off the shores of a quaint fishing village named Costa Azul in Mexico. It was their first voyage together. Life, however, had a nasty surprise in store for them. Soon after they had left the comfort of the shoreline behind, they were ambushed by a furious storm. It tossed their small boat about like a toy, steering it off its course. Their ship's motor and most of their onboard electronics were rendered useless. Jose, displaying his quick thinking, managed to radio his boss for help before the communication device gave up, but the response was as powerless as their situation. For 5 relentless days, the storm messed with them. When the skies finally cleared, Jose and his mate found themselves lost, with no idea of their whereabouts or how to get back. To make matters worse, the storm had taken away most of their fishing equipment, leaving them with mere basic survival tools. Their boat no longer had sails, motors, or oars. Month after month, they drifted aimlessly. Their sustenance came from good old Mother Nature, rainwater, and a random collection of sea critters like fish, turtles, and birds. After about 4 months, Jose lost his friend, but he decided to carry on, in hopes he'd one day be rescued. Little did he know, he was nowhere near the end of his journey. He attempted signaling every passing ship he saw, but his desperate cries for help were useless. Relying solely on rainwater and whatever the sea offered him for food, Jose kept track of his days by the changing phases of the moon. It was a bit over a year after the disastrous storm that Jose finally sighted land. His heart filled with hope, and he abandoned his trusty but worn-out boat, choosing to swim towards the shore. To his amazement, he found himself on one of the Marshall Islands, situated on the far side of the Pacific from where his ordeal had begun. The man was taken to a hospital where he slowly but steadily recovered his strength. Upon his return, his family declared they had never given up on him and were over the moon on the news of his discovery. However, this survival story was so fantastical that many raised their eyebrows in doubt. Could a man really survive for so long at sea on a tiny boat? However, there were those who offered a counterpoint. Experts explained that fresh meat from birds and turtles, which Alvarenga claimed to have consumed in plenty, contained enough vitamin C to ensure survival. In 2008, NASA had an intriguing question. How do spiders construct their webs in zero gravity? Therefore, they sent 2 spiders to the International Space Station. The first spider was the main participant, while the second served as a backup in case the first one didn't survive. However, things didn't go according to plan. The backup spider managed to escape from its chamber and visited its companion, resulting in a bit of a mess. They built tangled webs that interfered with each other. As if that wasn't enough, the flies that were supposed to be food for the spiders started reproducing faster than anticipated. Their larvae escaped from their container and covered the front window of the chamber. Over time, the spiders were completely hidden behind the larvae. Although this initial experiment didn't go well, one of the researchers involved in planning the spider experiment was still curious. In 2011, she got another opportunity to repeat the same experiment. This time, she sought assistance from other researchers. They decided to send a different species of spider into space and prepared 4 spiders, 2 for the ISS and 2 for Earth, allowing for result comparison. The goal was to expose the spiders to varying gravity conditions and observe their behavior. However, another twist appeared in the story. Initially, they believed they had 4 female spiders, but it turned out that 2 of them were actually males. Determining the sex of young spiders can be tricky, but fortunately, one male had already been sent to space, while the other remained on Earth, enabling valuable data collection. The second experiment proved successful. The spiders were active. They built and dismantled webs, and even without the assistance of gravity, they spun new ones. 3 cameras captured thousands of pictures, showcasing their hard work on the webs. Interestingly, it seemed that spiders created significantly more symmetrical webs in space than on Earth. The center of the webs was closer to the middle, and surprisingly, the spiders didn't always position their heads downward as they typically do on Earth. However, one significant factor made all the difference: light. When the spiders on the ISS had a source of light, they weaved asymmetrical webs, similar to those found on our home planet. Light played a crucial role in orienting the spiders in space. The chamber's lamps were attached at the top. If the lights had been positioned differently, for example on the side, it would have been challenging to observe the effect of light on the symmetry of webs in zero gravity. When the lights were turned off, the spiders rested in random orientations within their webs. Yet with the lights on, they would orient themselves away from the light source, which meant downward. Hence, in the absence of gravity, light assisted them in orientation. This discovery was unexpected, because spiders can typically build their webs in the dark and capture prey effectively, even without light. Spider's web itself is such a cool thing wherever they are. It's like these creatures have small silk production factories inside them. Within their body, a thread is stored in the form of a highly concentrated liquid. And a regular garden spider can produce up to 7 different types of silk, each having a unique combination of proteins. Each type of silk has a different purpose. For example, one type of thread makes the web elastic, which means the web absorbs the impact when insects collide with it. Another type of silk makes the thread flexible and strong, so it's more difficult to break. Some proteins found in the silk protect it from harmful bacteria and fungi, allowing the web to last longer. They also keep the silk moist so it doesn't dry out. Wow, imagine having a home where you don't have to buy anything extra to maintain it. Spider silk is lighter than cotton and incredibly thin, up to 1,000 times thinner than human hair. But it's also insanely strong. I mean, it must be, since that's what they rely on while living their everyday life. whether they're preying on some wandering insect or trying to resist heavy rain and wind. But you wouldn't expect it to be stronger than steel, right? Of course, in reality, you don't come across steel that thin. But if you could find a piece with the same weight as spider silk, you'd see that it has similar strength when pulled or stretched. In fact, spider silk is 5 times stronger than steel of the same thickness. Spider silk is also super stretchy, able to stretch up to 4 times its original length without breaking. Plus, it remains strong even in freezing temperatures below -40 degrees F. The most common type of spider is the orb weaver. They're masters at building those webs you keep seeing in open areas. That's where they have a better chance to catch a tasty lunch. But since they choose such spots, their webs are more prone to damage. That's why these spiders have a fascinating habit. They often rebuild their entire webs every day, even if the current web seems perfectly fine. I wish I was this dedicated to maintaining my bedroom. These spiders actually do this because they want to be prepared for the evening when they patiently wait for their potential prey to get caught in their carefully set trap. At first, this might seem like a waste of time. After all, they need to invest a significant amount of protein to produce the silk that forms their webs. But even if an orb weaver spider doesn't catch its meal overnight, it usually has enough silk proteins to dismantle its old web and build a new one for the following night. As the spider removes the old web, it consumes the silk at the same time, and by doing that, recycles the proteins it contains. If you've ever observed a spider on its web, you must have noticed how attentively it responds to even the slightest vibrations. It turns out that spider silk can be finely adjusted to different sound frequencies, unlike any other material. When a spider builds its web, it doesn't just spin the silk and leave it as it is. The spider actually makes adjustments to the silk by changing how tight or loose it is and how different threads are connected. This way, it creates a web that can vibrate or make different kinds of sounds. The spider is like a musician tuning their guitar. This feather-legged lace weaver is called the garden center spider because it mostly enjoys humid greenhouse conditions, and it has a really cool way of catching insects. Instead of spinning sticky webs like other spiders, it uses electricity. It produces incredibly thin silk, almost at the nanoscale. And on its hind legs, this spider has special hairs that act like tiny combs. As the silk emerges from its body, the spider uses these hairs to comb and manipulate the silk. And here's where the magic happens. This process generates an electric charge. The threads of the silk are now crackling with electricity, so they come together to form little poofs that resemble fluffy balls of wool. These electrically charged poofs are a great way to trap innocent insects wandering around. When unsuspecting prey comes into contact with them, the electric charge causes the threads to cling to their bodies, making it almost impossible to get away. Female Darwin's bark spiders make gigantic webs that can stretch over rivers and lakes, which means they can reach over 80 feet across. It turns out such enormous webs are just a part of their genius plan to catch their prey. A super strong web that goes across the water like a bridge can capture large insects that gracefully fly above the water's surface, like dragonflies, and it's an impressive project that takes days to construct. These special lines go across the river and anchor the web firmly to each bank. There's no easy way out of this. Amelia Earhart blazed a trail across the sky and left a comet tail of awe and inspiration. Her signature move? Oh, just casually zipping across the Atlantic Ocean, all alone, a feat only a person with nerves of steel could pull off. And if that wasn't enough, she whipped out another first, the inaugural solo flight from tropical Hawaii to the mainland US. However, one day, Amelia vanished during an audacious attempt to circle the entire globe in her trusty plane. Despite extensive searches, neither she nor her aircraft were ever found. Amelia's vanishing act turned into one of the most enduring whodunits of the 20th century. Now, let me tell you a bit more about the hero of our story. For starters, she came from the picturesque Kansas town of Atchison, but what made her truly special from a young age was the fact that she liked to break social molds. She liked to play basketball and tinker with cars. In between her adrenaline-filled exploits, Amelia served as a nurse's aide in Toronto. There, she started hanging around local airfields, probably trying to pick up some flying tips from the local pilots. Returning to the US, Amelia dipped her toes in pre-med at Columbia University, but traded her textbooks for a pilot's jacket after a thrilling airplane ride with a veteran pilot in 1920. That was the hook. Amelia became irreversibly smitten with the sky. Learning to fly was no small feat, but Amelia was up for the challenge. She enrolled for flying lessons soon after. To fund her high-flying dreams, Amelia got down to earth, slogging away as an administrative clerk in the city of Los Angeles. After scrimping and saving, she finally bought her own set of wings, a bright yellow plane, which she lovingly dubbed the Canary. After her flight test in 1921, she managed to snatch her first flight exhibition, wowing the crowds in Pasadena, California. When it came to setting records, Amelia was a master. She flew solo at amazing heights, a feat no woman had achieved before at that time. Next, she made a solo transatlantic flight, making landfall in a cow field in Northern Ireland. Despite her individual success, Amelia wasn't one to hog the limelight. She actively worked to bring more women into aviation. For this, she co-founded an organization dedicated to the promotion of female pilots. Today, this group still champions women in aviation across 44 countries. By 1937, Amelia was itching for another adventure. She planned a spectacular eastbound flight around the world, aiming to be the first pilot to pull off this celestial showstopper. Taking off from Oakland, California, she aimed to encircle the globe like a hawk circling its prey. This time she had a sidekick, a navigator named Fred Noonan. The duo blazed a trail from Miami to South America, across the Atlantic to Africa, then to India and Southeast Asia. A tragedy struck. Amelia and Fred never made it to one of their refueling stops at Howland Island. Their last radio contact with the U.S. Coast Guard was enigmatic, to say the least. After U.S. officials greenlit a massive search, the world waited. Sadly, after 2 weeks of suspense, Amelia and Fred were declared lost at sea. Ever since, countless theories have bubbled up about their fate. The official verdict is that the pair were lost in the Pacific Ocean. This theory suggests they finished up all their fuel while searching for Howland Island and plunged into the vast ocean. Over the years, various well-equipped expeditions have tried to locate the wreckage near Howland, but alas, the ocean isn't spilling the beans. There's another intriguing theory, the Gardner Island hypothesis. Some folks reckon Amelia and Fred landed on Gardner Island, now named Nikumaroro, in the Republic of Kiribati, which was a long distance off their course. Though search planes saw signs of recent activity on the island a week after Amelia's disappearance, they found no trace of the plane. This theory, however, strongly suggests that Amelia and Fred ended up as castaways on the island and eventually met their end there. Some evidence supporting this includes artifacts like a piece of plexiglass, a woman's shoe, improvised tools, and a cosmetics jar from the era, even some suspicious bones. But despite expeditions and sniffing border collies, no conclusive proof has emerged. Now, what do Godzilla-sized crabs have to do with Amelia Earhart's disappearance? It turns out that these quirky creatures might possibly hold the keys to one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. These ginormous creatures, the coconut crabs, would make you think twice before you dismiss anything as too large. They tip the scales at a whopping 9 pounds and can stretch out to a startling 3 feet. To put it simply, they make your average pug look like a snack. This theory takes us back to that tiny island in the Pacific, where Amelia supposedly made a pit stop but left no trace, Nikumaroro. When people went looking for clues regarding the famous aviator's disappearance, one rule was drilled into their thoughts. Watch out for those monster crabs. Their pincers can really pack a punch. By day, our explorers could easily steer clear of these hard-shelled creatures. They'd find the crabs lounging under the lush coconut palms, or maybe enjoying the breeze among the branches of the trees. Yes, you heard right. These critters are also good at climbing. But when the sun sets, well, that's when things get crabby. Those courageous explorers quickly learned that sleeping off the ground was essential unless they fancied a late-night claw massage. You see, these jumbo crabs are like the leading actors in this theory about what happened to our heroine Earhart and her navigator. According to this hypothesis, when the aviators missed their mark at Howland Island, they improvised a landing strip on Nikumaroro's reef. The plane eventually wandered off. Planes do that sometimes, you know, leaving Earhart alone on the island. Well, alone except for our mighty crustacean friends. By the 1940s, People had set up shop on the island, and a chap unearthed some bones. However, he managed to find only 13 of them out of a possible 206, the total amount of bones in a human body. So, where did the rest of them go? You guessed it. Our robber crabs might have fancied a little midnight toy. Evidence indicates that the crabs have a tendency to clean up the island by dragging stuff back to their cozy burrows. Over the years, multiple experiments have been conducted to verify if these crabs have a peculiar hobby of bone collecting. In one such study, they introduced some bones to the island and kept their eyes peeled. Within a fortnight, the crabs had made a buffet out of it. In another exciting chapter, our researchers brought dogs from the Canine Forensics Foundation to give the area around a wren tree a good sniff. The dogs had earlier indicated that someone had kicked the bucket there. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't find any bones, but they're still hopeful. After all, if history has taught us anything, it's to never give up. These theories at least have some science to back them up. But as with many famous disappearances, there are also juicy ones. Was Amelia captured by someone? Were she and Fred secret spies who returned to the US under new identities? One of the craziest theories was neatly packaged in a book called Amelia Earhart Lives. The author put pen to paper and argued that our beloved Lady of the Skies didn't just vanish into thin air. Instead, she pulled a Houdini. And here's where things get extra zesty. According to this book, Amelia was nabbed by a foreign government. Thankfully, US officials came to her rescue. After a heroic effort, they transported her into the most clandestine relocation program ever. Her new identity? She transformed into a mysterious suburban housewife under the name Irene Bolam. But, as with all good stories, there was a twist. The hiccup was that Irene Bolam was already out there, living her life and probably whipping up a mean meatloaf in her suburban kitchen when she got wind of her new identity as a repackaged Amelia Earhart. Obviously, Irene wasn't too thrilled about this revelation, so she lawyered up and took a stand against the claims, vigorously denying this shocking identity swap. Listen to this. Neanderthal fiber technology. Nope, I'm not joking. The concept is real. In 2020, a team of scientists published a paper that redefined the way we saw our closest ancestors. A find in France changed archaeology forever, and it wasn't the first time something like this had happened. But let me start from the beginning. Neanderthals. For a long time, they fit the image of the typical cavemen. If you are now thinking of someone like Fred Flintstone, you wouldn't be much wrong. What was the reason behind this stereotype? When did we start believing that Neanderthals were not the brightest tools in the shed of evolution? In comes William King, a 19th century British geologist. He was the man who named the Neanderthals. Based on the bones King found, the scientist declared the species not intelligent, and this image stuck with the Neanderthals for centuries to come. But a piece of string, just a quarter of an inch long, changed everything. A small, dry river valley, Abri du Maras, was the place of the great find. Archaeologists unearthed a cord fragment next to a stone tool. Such twisted fibers could have been used for everything from making clothes to fishing nets. In prehistory, this was some advanced tech, and the Neanderthals seemed to have mastered it. Scientists already knew that these early humans made tar from birch bark, and that they produced shell beads. There's even evidence of Neanderthal art. They were definitely not primitive. The string section and similar finds are changing the way we perceive our ancestors. The world of archaeology is constantly changing. Take the pyramids in Egypt, for example. Turns out, they weren't really built by an army of people who the pharaoh made work until they passed out. Herodotus, the famous Greek historian, was the man who started the confusion. He claimed, in 500 BCE, that 100,000 men took part in the construction of the Great Pyramid in Giza. He made no mention of who they were and why they were building the pyramids. That's how the myth started. Huge stone slabs pulled by humans, driven by a foreman with a whip. But Egyptologists would beg to differ. Those are the scientists who study ancient Egypt's culture. Fairly recently, they uncovered a workers' village that told a different tale. Yes, there was evidence of hard work on the workers' bones, but the construction industry is demanding even today. It took almost 6 years for 12,000 workers to complete the world's tallest building, Burj Khalifa. Back in Egypt, 3 times more workers finished the Great Pyramid in around 2 decades. An impressive feat of ancient engineering, wouldn't you agree? Superiors looked well after the Egyptians who built the pyramids. Their diet was rich in protein. They had medical care and they got paid properly. In fact, they lived better than the non-working population. And they lived with their families near the construction site. Archaeologists know all this because they unearthed bakeries and dormitories with bread jars and other goodies. Looks like the pharaohs were okay employers after all, and the job market wasn't that terrible. They also kept detailed papyrus records of the build and hieroglyphs. You and I wouldn't stand a chance of reading these letters that resemble images. Egyptologists had the same problem. For over a millennium, no one had used this type of font. And it's not like there was an English ancient Egyptian dictionary you could open and find meanings of words. But all this changed in 1822. A couple of decades before, the French found a broken slab of black granite. The stone contained 1 text in 3 scripts: Ancient Greek, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Demotic. The last one was also the Egyptian language, but in a simplified script. Scientists dated it back to 196 BCE. The content is a religious proclamation. A French philologist and Orientalist, Jean-François Champollion, was the first one to crack the code. You see, people haven't forgotten ancient Greek letters. The Frenchman successfully matched the Greek letters with the ones in the Egyptian script. And voila, we were finally able to read hieroglyphs. The name of the piece of granite that made it all possible was the Rosetta Stone. The importance of its discovery went beyond archaeology. The word Rosetta Stone even entered the English dictionary. It represents a discovery that helps people understand an enigma that has been puzzling them for a long time. There are similar games. A symbol is attached to a particular message. Then you have to decode the message by replacing the symbol with a corresponding letter. In a nutshell, this is what scientists did with the Rosetta Stone more than 2 centuries ago. Do you know what is the oldest deciphered language in Europe? It has an unattractive name, Linear B. The script belongs to the Mycenaean Greek language. It predates the ancient Greek alphabet by several centuries. You can easily guess which script it is descended from. Linear A. The people from Crete used Linear B more than 1,000 years ago. During the Late Bronze Age, the Greek civilization that used the script vanished. There was no one who could read Linear B, and more importantly, no one knew it existed in the first place. This was about to change during the first years of the 20th century. A British archaeologist by the name of Sir Arthur Evans excavated a vast palace complex at Knossos, Crete, Greece. This was the center of the Minoan culture that created the enigmatic script. The palace boasted some 1,300 rooms. They had colorful paintings of dolphins, griffins, and bulls. All of these captivated the archaeologists' imagination. But their biggest find was at first overlooked: thousands of slabs of baked clay. The fire that brought down the palace helped preserve the tablets. It was impossible to read the slabs, though. They were written in an unknown language. The scientific community had to wait for another half a century before Michael Ventris cracked the code. He was an English architect and cryptographer. Ventris studied Greek and Latin. While attending the famous archaeologist's lecture, the young man decided to solve the puzzle of Linear B once and for all. He managed to do so in 1952. One of Ventris's most amazing discoveries was that the script was an archaic form of Greek. But cryptology still hasn't solved the code of Linear A. This writing system will remain a mystery until a motivated young person like Michael Ventris comes along. They wouldn't have to be a professional archaeologist. Basil Brown certainly wasn't. Yet in 1939 he discovered the richest early medieval tomb in Europe. This happened in Sutton Hoo in the southeast of England. This wasn't an ordinary tomb made out of stone. It was a full-size ship, 3 times as long as a London double-decker bus. And that's not all. Apart from its main purpose, the ship was full of riches. Deluxe hanging bowls, feasting vessels, gold and dress accessories, and luxurious textiles were just some of the treasures found. Archaeologists were also amazed by the silverware from distant Byzantium. You probably know this city as Istanbul, Turkey. Even in our age, it's several days' drive from Sutton Hoo. Just imagine how much time and money it cost to import a silver plate in the 7th century. That's when the ship went down, according to archaeologists. The English couldn't have done it. At that time, there was no England. The people living in the British Isles at the time were the Anglo-Saxons. Perhaps the ship from the grassy mounds in Suffolk belonged to one of their kings? We will never know. The local acidic soil did away with any possible evidence, or no one laid there in the first place. It could have been a cenotaph, which is a monument constructed to honor an important person. The archaeologists still don't have a definite answer. But what they have found at Sutton Hoo shed light on the Dark Ages. Before the discovery of the ship, they knew little about what had been going on in Britain after the Romans left. Now, the image of the early Anglo-Saxon society was much clearer. Perhaps the English soil will be the site of the next great breakthrough in archaeology. Picture this. It's a cloudy, misty morning in the middle of winter. Tom wakes up, a bit nervous for the day ahead. He's leaving on a long journey through uncharted waters. His captain says they will try to leave England and make it all the way to the Americas. He's ready and packed to leave his house when his wife reminds him to take the biscuits he had spent the night preparing. Let's zoom in on these biscuits right here. They look a bit strange, don't they? These are called ship's biscuits, and they were literally the biscuits that sailors ate during long voyages at sea. A ship's biscuit could go years without going bad. I know that sounds impossible, but the secret is in the ingredients and baking methods. When sailors departed, they didn't know how long they would go without setting foot on land again, so they needed to be ready, food-wise. Otherwise, they could perish from extreme hunger. So bakers came up with this simple biscuit. It's mostly made out of 3 ingredients: salt, flour, and a bit of water. The idea is that the dough stayed as stiff as it could. Then, bakers would put them in the oven for hours, at very low temperatures. The purpose of this slow baking was to take off all the moisture in the biscuits. Even if you're not an experienced sailor, you might suspect that moisture is the enemy of food preservation. It makes stuff get moldy and attracts insects and other animals. Plus, a ship is already an extremely moist environment. So the biscuits had to go on the countercurrent of all of that. A ship's biscuit can go 6, 7, 8 years without going bad. The little holes you see on them help to get the moisture out during the cooking process. A sailor like Tom, medium-sized, would get a portion of 6 to 8 ship's biscuits per day. They were extremely nutritious and satiated a person's hunger. Now, this was a type of survival food. It wasn't meant to be super pleasurable, yummy, or even give you all the nutrients you needed. Just the basics. Now, do you have any idea what life was like in the 18th century? If you think about a city like New York, there were only about 18,000 people living there. For comparison, today the city hosts more than 8 million people. Back then, if someone had to travel from New York to Boston, there wouldn't be any of the convenience stores there were along the way. I mean, there weren't even roads as we know them now. So, people needed to make food provisions. And this is where portable soup came in handy. If you imagined a boiling pot of meat and veggies, I'm sorry to inform you, you are wrong. Portable soup is hard and condensed. It looks like this. Portable soup is a type of solidified broth, a very, very condensed substance made essentially of meat. Think about it. It's convenient, it's light, it doesn't take up much space, but it's extremely hard to make. The best meat to make portable soup is one with a lot of collagen, like beef shank, and the secret is slow cooking. You can't lose sight of it though, because if it boils up, you ruin the whole thing. While cooking the meat, it will release its taste in the water in the pot, and after a few hours, it's safe to take the beef out. The remaining water will be rich in nutrients and fats, and once you reduce that down for about 18 to 24 hours, you'll get a gelatine-like nutritional substance. Once this cools down, it turns into a tablet of sorts. It's pretty amazing to witness the entire transformation process, but hey, this dark tablet is really satiable. And to eat it, you just needed to find some hot water and put the meat tablet inside of it. It would release all the condensed nutrients in it, giving you a warm, hearty meal. Here's a trick question for you. Do you know why hamburgers are called hamburgers if they are not made out of ham? Apparently, it has to do with the city they were first invented in, the city of Hamburg in Germany. But it wasn't what we are used to today. I mean, they didn't even use ketchup. Well, at least not the tomato ketchup we use now. But did you know that other types of ketchup have existed throughout history? As weird as it may sound, back in the 18th century, people ate mushroom ketchup. For your information, if you look up ketchup in some dictionaries, it is by definition a sauce made out of mushrooms. It has nothing to do with tomatoes. I wonder where people got that idea from. Anyways, to make it you can use any type of mushrooms. Even shiitake if you're feeling fancy. The idea is to smash them, cook them, and add a bunch of spices to the mix. I'm talking clove, nutmeg, ginger, pepper, and whatever else your palate wishes for. And in case you're wondering what our ancestors ate it with, I have one word for you: meat. They would pour mushroom ketchup over a nice piece of steak, for example, like a gravy sauce or something like it. Now, if this just left your mouth full of water, I have good news. You can still find mushroom ketchup in Great Britain. It's just North America that kind of forgot it. Neat, huh? And what did people eat back in the day when they were feeling unwell? Today, we have a concept of food I particularly love: comfort food, which is something to eat when you are feeling down and sad. But then, on the days you're feeling sick, what do you eat? I immediately think of a warm soup or something nutritious and light. Our forefathers drank something called posset. Now, posset could be described as an eggnog with some sweets added into it. Its recipe can be traced down to as early as the 15th century. The drink was considered such a reliable remedy that Shakespeare even used it as a poison in Macbeth. Here's another quick pop quiz for you. Why do we say the proof is in the pudding? This famous expression simply means that you'll only know the true value of something once you experience it for yourself. The expression started to be used back in the 1600s, but there's an important thing to note here. In Britain, pudding is not the sweet dessert known by many in America. Rather, it's a savory dish, much like a pie. I guess it's safe to say that the British are good at turning almost anything into pie. From apple pie to pumpkin pie, chicken pot pie, and so on. Now, in the 18th century, they had something called beefsteak pie. This was an incredibly popular dish back then, but somewhere along the way we lost the habit of making it. Sure, you can find steak and kidney pudding today, but it's got all sorts of stuff in it, such as potatoes, carrots, and thick gravy. Up until the 19th century, people ate the stripped-down version of this dish, which was basically made out of richly flavored meat. They say breakfast is the most important meal of the day. If you're in the US, you might eat some avocado on toast or a rich bowl of cereal. If you're in Vietnam, you might enjoy a warm bowl of broth soup or rice. But if you were eating breakfast in 18th century England, or even the United States, you would get something like this. This is the old school version of what we know as bacon and eggs. Except that back then, it was called collops and eggs. According to the traditional Hannah Glass recipe, straight from the most famous cookbooks of back then, the egg wasn't fried or boiled, it was poached, and the bacon was probably not as processed as we eat them today. A little toast was added on the side, and there you had it. The perfect start for a long day. Let me take you to a place that seems to be out of this world. Life inside this cave has been isolated from the outside world for about 5.5 million years, and it does show. See for yourself. Due to such a long isolation, the conditions inside the Mobile Cave are like nowhere else on our planet. A unique ecosystem is flourishing there, even though there is a severe lack of sunlight inside the cave, and the air is toxic. The cave, located a few miles west of the Black Sea in Romania, was first discovered in 1986. Nowadays, you can only visit it if you have special permission. Plus, the central caverns are guarded naturally by narrow limestone tunnels and vertical shafts. So, if you're no stranger to claustrophobia, you'd probably better not enter this place. In the depth of the cave, the air has twice less oxygen than the air outside. Instead, it contains a lot of carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide, so not the freshest air you can breathe. It's also pitch black inside the cavern. But despite, or should I say thanks to, this cocktail of extremely harsh conditions, the site is a true goldmine for biologists. Shockingly, life seems to be booming here. In a 1996 study, scientists identified 48 species, and 33 of them were unique to the cave. Most of the creatures inhabiting the cave are tiny, with long limbs and antennae that help them navigate in the dark. They have no vision and lack pigment, and it makes sense. Why would you need to be able to see if you live in total darkness? And why would you need to be pretty and colorful with no one to see you? Now, I'm going to take you to another cave. It's no less amazing, but looks very different. This is the Giant Crystal Cave, aka the Cave of the Crystals, in Mexico. These ginormous crystals were found in 2000 by a mining company after the water was pumped out of the cave. 2 miners then saw the crystals after entering the drying cave on foot. These awe-inspiring crystals are actually massive gypsum pillars hidden 984 feet underground. They're anchored to the walls and the floor of the scorching hot cave. Scientists estimate that the crystals could have been already growing for 500,000 years. That's why many of them are so long and wide that you can walk across them. Unfortunately, visiting this wonder of nature is impossible at the moment. But maybe it's for the better, since the Giant Crystal Cave is a dangerous place that can easily turn into a trap. For tens of thousands of years, it was filled with groundwater, which was originally pushed upward into the opening by a magma chamber located in the depths of our planet. The magma under the cave kept the water hot, but eventually the temperature of the water dipped below 136 degrees Fahrenheit. As a result, the water started to fill with calcium and sulfate, whose particles began to recombine into gypsum. And then, white-tinted crystals took over the cave. And since they stayed underwater, they were able to keep growing. You don't have to fly to space to take a closer look at a black hole. Scientists have found something very similar to black holes in the southern Atlantic Ocean. A black hole has such an enormous gravitational pull that once something gets pulled inside, it doesn't have any chance to escape. Even light can't get out of a black hole. But ocean black holes seem to be almost as powerful as their space relatives. But instead of catching the light, they do the same with water. Ocean eddies are massive whirlpools that spin against the main current. They usually swirl billions of tons of water, and most of them are larger than a city. These whirlpools are so powerful that nothing trapped by them can escape. But the scariest thing is that you might not even notice heading into one of them. These things are so huge that you won't spot their boundaries until it's too late. When scientists started exploring ocean vortices with the help of satellites, they discovered the borders of several eddies. After that, they managed to prove that, mathematically, these whirlpools are the same as mysterious black holes in space. Massive eddies are surrounded by super-tight barriers where fluid moves in closed loops. Even water can't get out from the inside of these loops. That's why tight ocean vortices play the role of enormous containers. Water inside them can be totally different from the ocean surrounding an eddy. And I'm not only talking about its temperature. The salt content inside and outside a whirlpool often differs as well. On the thin Curonian spit splitting the Baltic Sea from the Curonian Lagoon, there is one of the most bizarre places on Earth. Locals call this area the Dancing Forest because pine trees in this forest have shockingly unusual shapes. They twist in spirals and circles along the ground. There are some theories why it could be happening, of course. Some people claim that huge amounts of positive and negative energies once clashed in that spot. More down-to-earth individuals believe that the reason is geological. Sandy soil in the area is too unstable to hold trees growing upright. The most popular is the idea that strong winds blowing from the water influence the shape of the trees. In any case, experts haven't come to the final conclusion yet. Look at these underwater crop circles. For the first time, they were spotted in 1995, close to southern Japan's coast. Local divers called these 7 feet wide structures mystery circles. The enigma had been plaguing many minds for almost 16 years until the culprit was finally caught. Imagine the researchers' surprise when it turned out to be a male pufferfish. The fish needs a bit more than a week to build one circle. And the aesthetics are obviously crucial. A male is swimming inside the circle, digging valleys in the sand with its fins. But that's not all. The fish also use shells and corals to decorate particular parts of their circles. This whole build-a-circle thing has a practical purpose as well. The way a male fish swims pushes the sand toward the center of the circle and creates a mound which later serves as a nest. The next mystery on our list is in the Caribbean. Just off the coast of Belize, there's a giant sinkhole. That's the Great Blue Hole. It's about 1,000 feet across and more than 400 feet deep. Once, a long time ago, this hole was a cave. But then rising waters filled it, making it collapse in on itself. The deeper you'll descend into the Great Hole's crystalline waters, the darker it will become. You'll see tons of stalactite-filled caves there, but entering them is extremely dangerous, unless you want to get hopelessly lost. Once you reach a depth of 50 feet, you'll notice that the water is shimmering. That's the invisible line dividing the sinkhole's salty top from the freshwater abyss. You might want to turn back right now. Who knows what you might come across in the murky depths. There was an old Amazonian legend that told about the river that was so hot that it boiled. And it was believed to be just a legend until Peruvian geoscientist Andres Russo questioned if the river could be real. All experts denied such a possibility. After all, hot rivers do exist, but only in the areas where there are volcanoes. As for the part of the country mentioned in the legend, there are no volcanoes in that region. But Andres Russo was too dedicated to give up. And in 2011, he finally located the river from the legends. The water in it was indeed steaming hot. Its temperature was 186 degrees Fahrenheit, not boiling, but pretty close to this point. But what shocked the researcher the most was the size of the river. One could think that the almost boiling water was the result of the activity of an underwater hot spring. But thermal pools are always small, while the river is 20 feet deep and flows for almost 4 miles. This is the only river of its kind on our planet.